a lot how criminals use knives because it's effective. If you look at prison as a source of material, if you're a prisoner, you're sitting around in a cell all day long. You have nothing better to do than think of a way to take someone down with a knife. If that's something your mind's exploring, you're there all day long, every day. All you have to do is start thinking about the effective use of the knife.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the latest episode 4 of Pinoy Martial Arts Mastermind. We are going to pursue another edition of our segment called Misunderstood Martial Arts. And today we're going to tackle the very much maligned Libre knife fighting, which was founded and created by Mr. Scott Babb in San Diego, California in the early 2000s. And as our special guest today, we have Mr. Scott Babb himself. And then again, unfortunately, we won't be with our two mainstays, Alfred and Franco. But you have...
Yeah, they're asleep.
They're asleep, yes. And so it's, hello everyone. My name is Dax, as usual. And then we have Sixto. Sixto, say hello.
Hi.
And that will probably be the last time we see Sixto because he likes to vanish once they start. Sixto and I are a lot alike in that neither one of us likes the limelight. He's just way better at staying out of it than I am.
Well, I guess he's less controversial.
Hey, I'm here, I'm
than you.
checking in, bam, I'm gone.
Anyway, guys,
that's true.
That's Scott Babb, all right? And of course, we'll be hearing a lot from him. And so we hope. So this is really just a an informal exchange, and nothing too formal, nothing too fancy. It's just three guys talking, all right? So anyway, Scott, give us an overview of what Libre is exactly. What is it?
So Libre is a knife fighting methodology that really evolved to deal with the way that knife violence occurs in the modern world. My background was in Filipino martial arts, and I think there's a big misconception that people think that I don't like Filipino martial arts, and that's absolutely not true. I love Filipino martial arts. I love training them. I love watching it. Occasionally you'll see me even post up me doing stick work or sword work or even traditional Filipino blade work. My background. And to this day, I love doing stick work probably more than I love knife work. But what I found was that a lot of the traditional techniques that I learned in Filipino martial arts are very functional in the environment they come from, where they were created and refined and tested in a place where they were carrying big, heavy agricultural blades. It's tropical, where it's hot most of the year. People wear thin clothing. So you could do a lot of damage with these big, heavy blades, especially attacking the opponent's limb. But when you put that into a modern context, in a place like America, where people don't carry these big, heavy blades, there might be a few places in the South where people carry big Bowie knives. Occasionally you'll see bikers carrying big knives, but for the most part people are carrying folding knives, or at most a small fixed blade knife. That isn't going to do the tremendous amount that big heavy agricultural blade is going to do. And then in places like America, in most parts of America, you have different seasons where it's going to be below freezing. People are going to be wearing big, heavy jackets for the year. Or even if it's not below freezing, they'll be wearing several layers of clothing. So you take a small, light knife, several layers of clothing, and it changes the tactics that you're going to use. And then the way knife violence actually unfolds, again, using America as an example, is we're not a knife culture. There's no knife dueling here. America's a gun culture. So there's gun duels, but Americans tend to gravitate more towards firearms as weapons as opposed to blades. So when a blade is being used in violent altercation, it's either being used for compliance, in which case it'll be displayed. They'll show the knife and try and, either get you to surrender your money as part of an abduction, as part of a sexual assault, or it's being used as a murder weapon, in which case it usually won't be sold. They'll approach you in a friendly manner, or at least a non-aggressive manner. They'll get close. They'll attach to you, whether it's grabbing onto the clothing or grabbing the back of the head, and start prison shanking you. And they'll try and make this happen in a confined space where you can't retreat or create distance. So when you start to look at how modern knife violence unfolds in most of the world now, it's largely along those lines. There will be variations in the tactics that are used, the grips they prefer, the knives that will be used. Depending if it's an urban or a more rural setting, you might find bigger blades being used in more rural areas where they're used for work. But by and large, in modern society, blades are used in a very violent manner. Not like you're going to separate and square off and sort of take hacks at each other back and forth like you do in a dueling or a sparring scenario. So what I really wanted to do was explore the way knife violence unfolds and then start to work backwards from that. Find out, okay, this is how a violent situation is going to unfold. How do we contend with that? And then pressure testing it from there. So I started in 2004, and I was very lucky in that I had a student base that was willing to explore this with me, where we could work on an idea or a concept for months. And then I could just come in one day and be like, hey, that thing we've been working on, I don't like it, get rid of it. Or we could pressure test and be like, okay, this is failing, forget about it. And, we could sacrifice several classes or weeks worth of classes or months worth of classes just to see if a concept was going to hold up. And most of it didn't. So that was really the starting point. Where Libre had its adolescence was I had the opportunity to start working with people in Mexico, specifically Ed Calderon of Ed's Manifesto. At the time, he was still active. And so he saw a need for blade work as far as law enforcement and military use in Mexico goes, where they're going up against the drug cartels. And he told me going in, he's like, whatever we teach these guys will get utilized, and it'll get utilized very soon. And when you have that level of realism, where what I'm doing is going to get tested, it's going to be used. And if I teach something that doesn't work, someone that's been learning my methodology could be killed as a result. It really changes your mindset, because now you have a level of responsibility where someone's trusting that what you're doing is functional, is going to work. And if it fails them, they could be hurt or killed. So it was something that we really took seriously, as far as like, okay, people's lives are in our hands now. So we started working with Ed's team when he was active down there, and then Ed really spread it throughout different parts of Mexico. And these guys went out and applied it in the field. We started getting real-time, real-world feedback where we could train guys, and within months they would say, okay, this is what happened. This is how long it took the guy to lose consciousness. This is how he reacted to this stab. And that really started to change the way that the system was structured. For example, the eye attacks that you see in a lot of our videos, they were always part of a system. They weren't really emphasized to the degree that they are now. And the reason why now when I teach, the first thing I teach someone is how to attack the face and eyes. So that was based off the feedback we got in Mexico. People were getting stabbed in the body, even getting stabbed in vital areas, and it wasn't necessarily registering right away. And they were able to fight through that. Every seminar I've ever taught, I always ask at the beginning, has anyone here ever been stabbed in a street altercation before? And there's usually one or two. And then I'll ask them, did you realize that you were stabbed during the altercation? And well over 90% of the time, the answer is no. Even when people have had their arms slashed in street altercations, I'll say, did you know at the moment, in that moment? And they'll say, no, I didn't. Or the ones that did will know it because they saw the blood, not because they actually felt the wound. And I had people whose arms were slashed in a street altercation, and I've asked them, did it inhibit your motor function in your hand or arm in any way? And they say, no, not at all. I was still punching the guy and fighting. And it's not that those tactics aren't effective, it's that they were designed for heavier blades. So in the environment, the culture where these tactics were invented, they're still very functional. They have a history of being effective. But, these are people who were slashed with a razor, slashed with a small knife. And because it didn't do the tremendous amount of damage that a heavier blade would, it didn't inhibit their motor function enough to make it a worthwhile tactic to really start developing. So with the eye shots, what we found is even though, it's definitely a less lethal tactic, likely a non-lethal tactic, when you attack the face and eyes, it registers with people and they drop like a stone. You hit the eye or even just the bony areas around the eye, a lot of times they'll drop holding their face. So if you can land those shots consistently at the beginning of an altercation, you can immediately put someone into a defensive mindset. And that might be all you have to do. You might be able to do, a quick shot to the eye, which will likely cause permanent damage, but you might end the altercation just with that. But if you do need to press the altercation further, now they're in a vulnerable state where, they're clutching their face. They know they've been hit. Now if you've hit the eye, you've created a blind side, a blind spot in their vision, and you can flank to that side and press your attack from there. So things like that, really, the feedback that we were getting from Mexico in real time really helped us shape and mold the system. And then as it started spreading around the world, there were other incidents, and that, I don't think we could talk about them, but I know there were some that happened in the Philippines as well. Genro filled me in on those. But different cultures and different places started to train different groups in this methodology and putting it into the field, and we started getting real world feedback. And that's really what shaped the system.
Yeah. Okay. So the thing that's very striking about Libre is that you've mentioned before that you've had FMA roots, and you practiced FMA for a long time, even taught it for a long time. But it's obvious that your moves are different. They're radically different from the traditional knife work that we're used to seeing. Is there a particular source from where you got these moves, or at least derived them from?
So there's a few different it depends on what aspect of Libre you're talking about. Mm-hmm. The footwork there's still a heavy Filipino influence in the footwork as far as the flanking motions and the triangular footwork. When it comes to the angles, it has a boxing base. It's very much rooted in Western boxing. And tactically, most of the tactics that we teach stem in some fashion from boxing. Like what I was just discussing, where you take someone's eye and then you move into that blind spot to pressure attack. That's very much a boxing tactic. If you boxed and you start tagging the person and their eye starts swelling shut, you'll start circling in that direction because they're not going to see the attacks coming from there. If the opponent's right eye is shut, you'll start, presuming you're an orthodox fighter, you'll start leading with those left hooks because they're not going to see that hand coming over the top and tag him on the left side. So tactically, something like that stems from boxing. The angles stem from boxing.
Right.
The blade work comes from several sources. There is still some Filipino influence in it. A lot of it stems from prison shaking. Actually studying prison stabbings and just studying real footage of knife assaults and seeing what kind of stabs are effective in the street. One of the principles we teach is the percutio principle, which is Latin for hammering. And generally with this principle is you'll double the opponent over, then rapidly stab down on the back. And this stemmed from studying CCTV footage, where we would see that people in a point down grip, generally when they were stabbing down, they were connecting at a much faster rate than when someone was in a hammer grip stabbing. And the reason why is because if you're in a hammer grip and you're stabbing, the energy that you're hitting the opponent with is pushing them away. You're stabbing here, that's pushing them away. So if you attach to them and start stabbing like you see in a prison stabbing or in a street altercation, you end up getting this expansion and contraction as far as the dynamic of the altercation goes. Where I attach, I start stabbing, he's maybe realizes it, starts blocking, trying to fend it off, and maybe 30 to 50% of my stabs are getting through, and he's pulling away and I'm pulling him towards me. And that expansion and contraction really slows down the rate of my attack and how many shots are connecting. But when I started looking at footage where people were using a point down grip, you don't get this expansion and contraction because the energy is coming in a more downward direction. So you're rooting them to the ground. And if you double them over and actually get their back exposed to you, now there's nothing between you and the targets. So you can put someone down very quickly in this manner. If you can come in with, say, a slap to the groin, double them over, and then start stabbing over the top and just drive them into the ground that way. It's a very hammer fist type motion.
Right.
So a lot of the blade work came from studying how knives were being used in the street and seeing what was getting through in these altercations and what wasn't. And this is something that I say a lot, and it's something that I advocate anyone who's interested in combatives or street-based martial arts, is we live in a fascinating time right now where you can log on to YouTube and watch hundreds, thousands of fights that have been recorded, real fights, real violent altercations that have played out. You can watch dozens, maybe hundreds of knife assaults and see how knife attacks are happening in the real world in real time. And this is a very new phenomenon in human history. When I was coming up in the martial arts, when all of us were coming up in the martial arts, if you saw a violent altercation, you saw it in real time. Chances are it wasn't filmed. So you would see what happened, but you would have to sort of mental notes of what was happening in real time and maybe talk about it with people that are there and be like, yeah, he grabbed the dude here and took his leg or whatever happened. You'd have to be in law enforcement or have some sort of connections to see, a video of a real stabbing happen that wasn't blurred out. So a lot of things were tested and passed on. The results of those tests were passed on in very much an oral tradition, where it was someone would see something, tell someone, that person would pass it along. And it was like a game of telephone where, you'd sort of lose track of what happened in the real altercation. But now anyone right now can just jump on YouTube and start looking up, search CCTV knife assault, and you'll find that dynamic that really appeared in the CCTV footage recreated, and then pressure test my response against that. That's how I can really start to see what's working and what isn't. And that's really how the blade work started to evolve. It was more of a response to the way real world violence plays out, as opposed to sort of sourcing it from historical materials.
Right. Okay. So this is after all our segment called Misunderstood Martial Arts. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that are, or at least some comments that are frequently said or asked. And I'd like you to address these statements. No? A lot of people say that Libre practitioners stab like criminals. And there was this one particular guy, a very famous guy, who said that in criticism of Libre. But it's echoed by pretty much everyone else who does some sort of blade work, or at least study blade work. So what is your answer to this, or at least what is your take on that? When people say that? Exactly. All right, expound, please.
Yeah, we mimic a lot how criminals use knives because it's effective. If you look at prison as a source of material, if you're a prisoner, you're sitting around in a cell all day long. You have nothing better to do than think of a way to take someone down with a knife. If that's something your mind's exploring, you're there all day long, every day. All you have to do is start thinking about the effective use of the knife. A good-natured person who's even keeled and sane and isn't living in some kind of war zone isn't going to go around having reason to use a knife in a violent manner. A criminal is. A criminal is someone who's actually been there and done this. And they know what they do works because they've used it themselves. They've seen it used in the culture they're in. And so they tend to develop very rudimentary but very effective methodologies for using a knife. And so as someone who isn't a criminal, who doesn't train criminals, but has an interest in being highly effective in the knife, yeah, you're damn right. I'm going to look at criminal sources and be like, how are these people going to come at me with a knife, and how can I do what they do better than they do it? How can I take what they're doing in a very unpolished, rudimentary, unsophisticated way, take that, streamline it, put it into a teachable curriculum, and become better at their game than they are. So yeah, there's absolutely a criminal influence to what we do, but that doesn't mean that we're criminals or we advocate criminal behavior.
Right.
It means that we're looking at the mechanics of the way someone uses a knife who happens to be a criminal, seeing that it's effective and sourcing that for our own purposes, which aren't criminal. It's to overcome that. I don't believe in a passive response to someone trying to murder me. If someone's coming at me with lethal intent and I'm trying to, take that attack and redirect it and strip their knife out with mine and lock them up and take them down to the ground, to me, I've put myself at a disadvantage tactically that's almost impossible to overcome, because someone has an intention of ending my life, and I'm trying to do as little damage as possible in response to that. And someone might say, well, it's unethical to meet lethal force with lethal force. I think it's unethical to surrender your life to someone who wants to kill you. This is something that Lee Morrison, who you just spoke to, speaks about much more eloquently than I do. But the idea that you're going to risk laying down your life because you don't want to meet lethal force with lethal force, to me, one, it emboldens criminals, and it creates a culture of victims where you say, I'm not going to fight for my life. I'm not going to end someone's life to protect the people I love and care about. That to me is a very immoral stance to take. Now, I will qualify that by saying that there are people, some who like to talk shit about Libre and me, who advocate less lethal knife usage, cutting tendons and just allowing the person to collapse. And I think tactically, from a self-defense standpoint, that's a potential disaster waiting to happen. But if you know in your heart, if you've sat down and meditated on it, and you're absolutely sure that in the moment you just don't have it in you to take another life, to take another person's life, in that instance, training in that manner makes sense. Because you're like, I know I'm not going to be able to take someone's life, but I will get as proficient as I possibly can at disabling someone. And maybe if you're really, really skilled and he's really, really unskilled, you might be able to pull that off and survive. So you're elevating your odds, even if it's just slightly. But in a situation where, someone is in my face, they produce a weapon, they're reaching out to grab onto me and start just prison shaking me, and I know if I freeze in that moment, I've got seconds left to live. Yeah, I'm going to stab the fucker in his eye. I'm going to grab his left shoulder, pull him to the side.
Like a criminal that you are.
And this is
actually, yeah.
This is
actually what? Yes,
Oh,
Scott. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, what you mentioned about the defense of a grabbing, locking, stripping, disarming, that's what 99% of FMA guys teach. And personally, my stance there is it's very difficult to make it work.
Yeah. And like I said, I love Filipino martial arts, and I think a lot of Filipino martial arts actually is very effective. There are certain things that I don't agree with within Filipino arts, and trying to disarm a knife in a knife-on-knife altercation is one of them. If I have the level of skill and the ability to pull off a move like that, I have the level of ability and skill to end the altercation in a much faster way, where that'll give me a higher chance probability of survival. Because the thing with knife work, and this is true of all martial arts, you see it in combat sports, in boxing and MMA, you could be way better than the person you're up against. And this is especially true with knives. You could be light years ahead of them. But all it takes is just one lucky, they're flailing out in a way you don't expect, and they hit your artery. And you might put them down first, but now you've sustained a life injury too. And it's not because this person was more skilled than you or anything. It's just luck of the draw. And the longer the altercation goes on, the greater the chance that you're going to catch one of those shots. So for me personally, I want to end the altercation as quickly as possible. I want to minimize the risk of me sustaining a life-ending injury or a life-altering injury by ending things quickly. I don't want to prolong this experience by addressing it in a very passive mindset. The other thing is we've actually pressure tested this. As you know, the way we prefer to spar in Libre is in an enclosed space because it develops aggression, forces you to not only forces you to be aggressive, because if you're not being aggressive, your opponent is, you're just going to get worked over. But it also teaches you to deal with that level of aggression because someone's coming at you with aggression and you're meeting them with aggression. And so we're not dueling, we're not standing back and measuring and sort of hacking back and forth with each other and feeling each other out. It's very fast, 20, 30 seconds of just pure, intense, chaos. And we've done situations where I've, early on, we did testing where I'd say, okay, you're going to be the counter strike. You're going to block, attack the arm, defang the snake, or, evade and hit, and you're going to be the aggressor. So one person has the role of, I just want you to grab this dude, throw him into a wall, and prison shank him, and one guy is trying to counter strike. And when we started setting up roles like this, what we found was, and this wasn't at a time where we had decided that, an aggressive, working off an aggressive platform was going to be most effective. We were legitimately testing to see what was going to work. And when we did, we found that the person who was being the aggressor almost always came out on top. And the moments they didn't, it wasn't because the other person's tactics were better. It was that the aggressor stumbled over his feet and fell, or lost his weapon, or something along those lines. And so for me, putting yourself in a responsive position where I'm waiting for someone to take a hack at me with a knife so I can counter that and move around it, is tactically putting you at a severe disadvantage. Now that being said, there's a very narrow window of opportunity where someone's coming at you with lethal force and you're preempting that. Someone's got a knife and they're barreling down on you, and you have to be the one who's willing, as that aggression's coming at you, to strike first. And you're going to have a fraction of a second to take control of the altercation. And if you hesitate, they're going to lash out with your attack. Now you find yourself in that defensive role, and you're going to have to reverse that dynamic. So for me, the logical way to deal with someone trying to murder me or murder someone I care about is to be far more effective at ending someone's life than they are at ending mine. I know it's not the most PC thing to say. It's not the most comfortable thing to think about. And this is where I think there's a huge misconception with Libre, is they see the videos, and people see the videos and see the violence of what's going on. And what they don't see, and maybe it's something I should talk about more publicly, I just find that it's not something that a lot of people tend to want to talk about online, but I find people are to engage in this type of conversation in a studio setting or in a seminar, is contextualizing what's going on in a situation where you're using these tactics. Like, what are the dynamics? Is it a home invasion? Is it sexual assault? Is it part of an abduction? Is it some terrorist scenario? Is it just someone's insane and is just looking to start sticking people? Is it, a minor incident that escalated and, this guy was just a hothead? about a weapon. So understanding that that, you know, in the scenarios we're training for, it's because someone is trying to end our life. And the other thing is the actual exploring the moral and psychological ramifications of doing this. You know, being in a position where you know that when the altercation is over, I had to do this. Because if you're not absolutely certain that utilizing these skills and tactics was absolutely necessary, even if from a legal standpoint it was justified. He had a lethal force weapon. He was coming in as lethal. We went at it. I won. And the legal system looked at this and said I was justified in what I was doing. Am I going to be able to live with myself afterwards? Because I've got to live with that for the rest of my life. And if I'm not convinced that I was, that's going to tear me apart emotionally. And I think any rational person, it would. And even if they were justified, I think there's going to be this weight on their shoulders. But if I engage in this and I know, like, you know what, I probably could have removed myself from that position. You know, this dude, he was, you know, overweight. I know that I could have ran from him, that he wouldn't have been able to keep up with me. But I stood there and fought, and I ended his life. That's going to haunt me for the rest of my life. And I think that's going to haunt anyone. And so what I always tell people is, you know, I will never be in a blatant altercation where it was my choice to be there. I'm going to engage in a knife fight for pride, or just because someone, you know, pulled a knife on me and challenged me to a knife fight. As much as it damages my fragile male ego, I'll remove myself from that situation. The situations that you see playing out in our training videos that we're training for is the situation where you can't remove yourself from that situation. By way of example, say a home invasion. You know, someone breaks into your house as part of an abduction or part of a robbery or something, and now I'm in this situation where I've got to fight for my life. That's the situation that our training is intended for. A lot of, you know, I not so much anymore, but I used to get a lot of questions where people would say, well, how would you deal with this system? This system does this. How would you counter that? And my response is, I don't give a fuck. I spend zero time thinking about that, because I'm not training to engage in a sparring match with the system, or even in a life or death altercation with another system. What I'm training for is for someone who's a criminal who's coming in with lethal intent. My question to the people who ask that question would be, how will that other system fare in this real world scenario? How will this other system fare if a criminal grabs hold of them and just starts prison shanking the shit out of them? And what I find when I ask that question is people don't want to talk about that. People don't want to talk about, like, oh, well, I'm in an enclosed space, you know, I'm in a 10 by 10 room. This dude has me in a corner. He has a screwdriver and he's just grabbed onto me and he started prison shaking the shit out of me. People don't want to talk about that scenario. They want to play out the old kung fu movie scenario. My tiger crane is better than your monkey style. You know, my drunken fist can beat your dragon style. And to me, that's entirely the wrong question to be asking in a combative's mindset. The question you need to be asking is, will your training save your life when someone's trying to murder you?
Yeah. Actually, you covered pretty much my next question, which was, how would you respond to people who say that that your techniques seem to be geared on attacking unarmed individuals? So you touched on context, which is the most important thing.
And this is something that, because I do a lot of demonstration on the Babb dummy on social media, that's something that gets asked a lot. And they'll be like, well, you know, the dummy doesn't hit back or whatever. The dummy's unarmed. And my response to that is, a heavy bag doesn't hit back.
Exactly.
A mukjang in Chinese martial arts doesn't hit back. A striking board in Japanese martial arts doesn't hit back. It's a training tool. And I like using the Babb dummy because it creates a human form. You know, you can see where the eyes are, you can see where the neck is, and you can actually target that better than you can with a heavy bag. And when you put the anatomy rash guard over it, you can see where the organs are. Now you have a visual representation of where the organs are. And so it's teaching you how to put together combinations. It's helping you develop speed, accuracy, range. But just like working a heavy bag, it's one tool. A heavy bag, you're working combinations and developing power, little bit of footwork maybe, and a little bit of range work, but it's a training tool. I use this tool a lot in my social media videos because a lot of the people who are watching these videos aren't part of a chapter or don't have training partners. So it's something that anyone who's watching can take and practice on their own. And generally it's a starting point. When I start with new students, I'll have them working against a static target, whether it's a dummy or it's a training partner who's sitting there, just to help them work the targeting, put together combinations the same way you would on a heavy bag or any other striking surface. And then I'll start putting that into a contextual scenario where I'll have people who are being aggressive and maybe have a weapon drawn and are coming at them, and the person's armored up, they have a face mask on, and depending on what we're doing, maybe body protection. So the person will be screaming and coming at them, but they're preempting that shot. And then once they get proficient at that, then you start working into the person's coming in swinging, and you're having to deal with that, negate that. But it's building blocks, just like in boxing. In boxing, especially a good boxing coach, isn't going to throw you in the ring and have you start trading with someone on their first day. Until very recently, most legit boxing gyms wouldn't let you spar for the first 6 to 12 months. If you go back to how boxing was trained in the early days, in the early 20th century, they would have you throw nothing but jabs for 3 months. They would tie your backhand to your head and just have you shoot jabs for 3 months straight. Now, if you try to use a boxing gym or tried to have a boxing gym in today's world and told your students, yeah, I'm going to tie your arm to your head and have you punch a bag for 3 months, no one's going to sign up for that. They want to do a 6-punch combination on their second night. But even today, it's like a good boxing coach will teach you, here's your stance, here's where you lift your hands, here's stepping forward, stepping back, how to step side to side, how to pivot, how to move. Now here's a jab. Now we're going to step forward with a jab. We're going to step to the side with a jab. We're going to pivot and throw the jab. We're going to throw the jab, pivot off, throw another jab, throw a jab, advance, throw a second jab, double up on the jab, advance, throw a jab. And so there's building blocks. And the reason why a very functional system like boxing works off of that building block mentality is because it works. And what you see a lot in knife work is a lot of flow patterns. They'll teach a flow pattern where we're going back and forth, like you cut here, I cut across your arm, I come back, you cut across my arm, I come at this angle, you cut this way, I come back at you, you cut that way, I trap and parry this and cut here, you trap and parry this and come there. And it's just, a sort of endless routine going back and forth. And what I found with that type of training is it develops the illusion of proficiency. It looks like fighting on the surface because there's two guys standing in front of each other, moving back and forth, and they're both lashing out with their blades. And you start to feel proficient because here's a drill that you didn't know, and you stumbled through at the beginning, and then you got fluid with it, and then you got fast with it, and now you can do it really fast with someone. And then you maybe learn a second drill, and then you take those two drills and you transition back and forth. You start with drill 1, and then there's a cue to transition to drill 2, then back to 1. And it's fun, and I love doing it. I love training it. Fun to train, fun to watch, and it looks great on film too. But what ends up happening is when you take all these drills and then you throw someone in a 6x6 room and say, okay, fight. All of a sudden, now they're not doing these drills. Now they're not flowing because knife violence doesn't flow. Knife violence isn't a give and take scenario. Two people trying to stab the other one to death, or one guy trying to stab an innocent person to death. There's a level of violence and intensity that isn't reflected in these sort of soft back and forth flowing patterns. And so in that scenario, I find those drills to be detrimental in a lot of ways. But if what you have worked is stabbing the shit out of what's in front of you, having that level of aggression, and you've become really proficient about stabbing the eye, palm to the head, grabbing the person, pulling them, stabbing them in the back several times. If you've developed that, and you can do that with a level of emotional content and with aggression and speed and accuracy. And then you take that and you put that in a scenario where you're locked in a 6x6 room with an opponent. That training will come out because you've been training to have something in front of you and stab the shit out of it. And I find it's a more expeditious way to get someone proficient, and the overall proficiency for a real world scenario as it plays out in most parts of the world, it's more training. And if you train someone, you gradually start on more and more layered collision, doing simulation and scenario-based training, and having someone come at you with increasing level of aggression, adding in multiple opponents, and then getting to the point where you're not telling the student what scenario they're going to be in, where you have that person go to the other room. And then you take the class and you say, okay, you and you are going to be the aggressors, but I don't want you coming in at the same time. I want you to attack first. When he starts engaging you, second opponent's going to come in. I want to see if he's aware of someone who's flanking him from the side. And then that first person walks into the room not knowing the situation that's going to play out. That starts to more accurately reflect a real world situation. And so that's the sort of mentality. But because people mostly see me working the heavy bag, or working the Babb dummy, I'm sorry. They tend to think that I'm just teaching someone to stand in front of someone and stab the shit out of them. And it's like, no, we're working specific skills. We're working speed, combinations, accuracy, timing, range. And those are all attributes that need to become second nature to you.
Yeah, it pretty much describes what Libre has been doing, the way you guys train and everything. It's funny because there was I sparred with this guy once, a very traditional FMA fighter, and I'm an FMA guy also. I study Sixtas Cartas Hermanos, and that video came out, and a lot of people were appalled by the fact that I kept on stabbing the guy in the face and in the neck. And somebody said, oh, that's because that guy's a Libre guy too. So, and people were shocked by that I kept on stabbing the guy in the face. I think I stabbed him in 3 rounds. I think I stabbed him in the torso like maybe twice. And maybe, all in the face and the neck.
Pro plucks, eye plucks, there's hammer grip shots coming from the outside, which is one of our go-to entries in Libre. And you see it works very functionally as it did in that scenario.
It did very much so, yeah.
It was but even in that scenario where it was a sparring scenario, you very beautifully adjusted your tactics accordingly to reflect the scenario you were in, where it was a more ranged scenario. It was a more measured bout. And so you didn't just rush the dude straight in because it was an open floor in a big room, and you weren't dealing with someone who was just rushing you with lethal intention. And the reason, one of the many reasons you fared very well in that bout was that you recognized the situation for what it was. This was a sport-based scenario.
The context.
And
yes.
While you utilized some Libre principles very effectively, you did it in a manner that reflected a more dueling scenario. Now, if you took that same scenario and you'd done 1 round on the open floor, and then you did a 2nd round in the blender.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like now you're playing on this guy's, in this guy's arena, and that, which, I mean, I hate to declare winners and say this, but it's very obvious to anyone who watched the footage that you controlled that bout from beginning to end. But then if you'd taken the second, did round 2 in the blender, where you put them in a confined space, 6x6 room, then you really would have seen Libre playing out against a system that was far less aggressive, a mentality that was far less aggressive. And you would have seen, likely, not definitely, but you probably would have seen a lot of falling apart in your opponent, because they've never been in a scenario where someone's just slammed them into a wall and prison shanked the shit out of them.
Let me explain to people what the blender is. The blender is, you're practically 2 guys practically in a closet. All right, you're in an area, very enclosed area, and you just go and stab each other. That's why
Yeah.
it really looks like a blender when it's happening. So a human blender.
Yeah.
Go on, Scott.
And when it comes to the blender, a lot of people misunderstand what we're training there. It's like when you're in that scenario, you're going to get stabbed. You're probably going to take some lethal stabs in that altercation. But what you're learning to do is have that level of aggression in your face. And because you're not, you're in some kind of helmet or you have some kind of eye protection at least, if you stab someone in the eye there, it's not going to blind them. It's not going to put them on defensive. But if you're in that scenario with live blades and you get that first shot to the eye and you stun them, you can end that altercation in seconds, because now you've just created, even if it's just a second or two that you've put them out of commission, now you can slam them into the wall. Now you can, knee or slap to the groin, double them over and come over the top and stab them and just put them down on the ground very quickly. But for the context of the drill, what you're doing is really learning to be aggressive and deal with that level of aggression in that scenario and trying to be more lethal than your opponent is. But like all drills, you're not doing this with live blades. The person isn't reacting differently or is reacting differently than they would in a real situation. So you have to understand that even with a blender where you're channeling a more realistic level of street aggression into it, it's still just a training simulation. It's still not building into the context of scenario-based training. And scenario-based training has its own limitations because it's still a training situation. It's not being in a street altercation. And so these are other things that you have to keep in mind as you're training. Like, there's always going to be a deficiency in whatever drill you're doing. The key is to do as much training as you can that is going to translate into the street, and omit all the training that's going to give you a false sense of what a street altercation is going to be. And I think this is where a lot of not just Filipino martial arts, but a lot of traditional based training, and I came from a traditional background, and I say this as someone who still loves traditional martial arts. If I'm watching footage of martial arts, say on YouTube, 95% of the time I'm watching traditional martial arts. I love it. I love being around the culture. I love watching it. But a lot of traditional training, the reason why it falls apart in the street is because it develops a false sense of what a street altercation is going to be. You start to think that a street altercation is going to play out like the drills you're doing or like a sparring session. And then when it doesn't, you fall apart.
Yeah, Scott, I'd like to say something about that. There's this grandmaster in FMA who will remain unnamed. Okay, he teaches a lot of disarms, counters, a lot of that stuff. Okay, stripping. But when it came to a real situation, he wasn't able to apply any of those. He just took his bag and used it for blocking the knife attack until the guy got tired and ran away. Because I think criminals have a time limit. Maybe after 30 seconds, the criminal the mugger couldn't get him, so he just gave up and ran away. And he was not able to apply any of his techniques.
Yeah, but credit to him for realizing that early enough in the altercation and adapting his response accordingly, rather than trying to do something that isn't going to work. I found myself in a situation once back when I was a locksmith where I had a mag light and a utility knife, a spade daga, like in a modern world context, actually ready to go at someone with a spade daga. Two guys with baseball bats, and nothing came of the situation. It was diffused, but there was a minute or two where I really thought, this is it. I'm going to have to fight for my life. I'm going to have to apply these skills that spade daga, which I never envisioned that I would be in a spade daga situation in a real life altercation. But there I was. And I can tell you what was going through my mind wasn't, oh yeah, I'm going to do that slick ass disarm that I love and then lock him up and take him down and do that. What was going through my mind was, why the fuck didn't I spend time? Why the fuck did I spend time learning disarms that I knew I wouldn't use in a real world altercation? Those were the kind of thoughts that were playing around in my head. Like, all this time I'd wasted doing things that deep inside you were really going to work, and really wishing I had spent more time sparring and more time drilling the basics. And that changed my outlook a lot when it comes to weapons training. And that's sort of the mental test that I give everything I teach is, if I was in a situation where my life depended on it, someone's coming at me looking to end my life, would I trust my life to this technique? And if the answer is no, I don't teach it. You know, that's one of the qualifiers I use. The other is something that can be taught to the majority of students. They can make it functional, because as someone who's trained since I was 8 years old, just because I can make something functional doesn't mean that someone who's trained for a year or 2 or 5 can make functional. So is it something that a broad base can make functional? Is it something I would trust my life to in a real life altercation? Is it something that can be utilized when I have no fine motor skills, where I'm in an adrenalized state, where vision's dimmed and my heart's racing, I can hear beating in my ears and seeing stars, vision might feel heavy. I've lost all concept of time. Things feel like they're happening all at once and in slow motion. If you've never been in a situation where you felt your life legitimately threatened, you probably don't understand what I'm saying right now. If you have, you're going like, yep, I know what that's like. You know, I know what it's like to be in that situation where your body feels locked up and like your vision's tunneled. Understanding that what you're training, you're going to have to utilize in that situation. And while I teach a lot of applications, the mechanics of what I teach are very basic, and there's a lot of overlap. If you're watching this way down the road, years from now, we're recording this during the time of coronavirus, where we're all quarantined, and I've been doing live classes online on Instagram for free, just to kind of give people, you know, a training outlet. And I think we just did the 10th one. Each one's about half hour. So we've done about 5 hours of training now. And I've explored a lot of different things as far as like range and flanking and targeting. And the most recent one we were doing, working against people with impact weapons. But basically what I've taught over the course of these last 10 weeks is just some very basic principles: attacking the face and the eyes, then working down the body, attacking the throat, the chest, and the lungs. Blindsiding, taking the eye, moving to the blind spot, and attacking the body. From the outside, moving from the outside, hitting the eye, then moving to the body. Or if you're in close, starting at the body, then moving up to the eye. Everything I've done has just been variations of that very simple principle of attacking the face, then attacking the body, then attacking the face. But what we've been doing is taking those very basic principles and showing how to apply them in a multitude of different scenarios. And to me, that's what good combatives training is. It's not having 20 tools for 20 different situations. It's having 3 tools for 20 different situations, or ideally 1 tool for 20 different situations. And it's something that I see in your stick fighting that you teach, is you only teach a handful of strikes and a few different ways to apply those strikes. But you master those basic skills. It's something that Lee does very well, or does phenomenally well with urban combatives. If you look at his, the strikes that he does and the combinations, there's a lot of overlapping principles for different scenarios. It's just applying those in different situations. And to me, that's the key to solid training for the real world, is taking simple principles that will hold up under duress and being able to apply those in as many different situations as possible.
Right. Well, yeah, thank you for that. Very, very enlightening, Scott. But we go now to the part of the show that Sixto hates the most, and it's the part where I ask him the questions. Okay. So Sixto, all
He's
right.
plotting right now. He's got a smoke bomb ready. He's going to disappear like a ninja.
He was kind of hoping that we wouldn't get to this point. But anyway, Sixto, okay, you studied and actually taught practically a lifetime worth of traditional Filipino martial arts. You're an instructor of 4 or 5 of the main, at least of the 4 or 5 of the main systems, very traditional systems of of Filipino martial arts, and you've actually created your own martial art in Carlos Hermanos together with your brother Baste. But okay, so what made you get Scott's Libre, which is so radically different from what we know that your background is, and actually think of bringing it here in the Philippines? What made you do that exactly?
Okay. So I've been training in a lot of knife systems, Filipino knife systems, and after studying them for decades, basically you could group them into three or four basic systems. One is grapple the guy, strip, counter. Another technique is when your opponent stabs you, block, stab. Another one is parry, go to the other side, stab. Basically three or four, okay? 3 or 4. I felt there was something missing with what I'm learning, and I did some research online. Then I Googled knife fighting, and I was specifically looking for a non-Filipino system. Then I saw a lot of systems. Then what attracted me to Libre was I saw the wall work. I realized in a lot of real fights, what happens in the wall work happens in a real fight. And I did some research with Libre. I saw that there's a certain range that Libre focuses on, which a lot of the FMA system they do not touch. So I realized, okay, this is missing in my system, and I like the concept that Libre. I'm not sure if I'm correct, Scott. Libre for me is something like boxing, Western boxing with knives.
There is
with a knife.
A component in it, yes.
Yes. So that's what attracted me. Because anyway, Scott, a lot of the guys here that trained with us, most, if not everybody, we all have a boxing background. So that really attracted me. Initially, I just wanted to study it. I had no plans for getting certified. But after, I think I took it 2 years, your online course, then I said, I told myself I wanted to learn more. So that's how I asked you how I can get certified. Then we flew in Josh here, and that's it. That's history. I think that was way back 2015, right? 2015.
That's about right.
Yeah. So from there, I would consider myself as a first batch. Dax was the
Absolutely.
second batch, and then we flew in Josh again. Because personally, I don't want to certify. I want to fly in somebody from San Diego to certify the guys here. So anyway, and that's it. That's a history, and it grew from there. It spread like fire.
Yeah, to the point that you have celebrities and very high level officials and all kinds of people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's the funny thing about Libre is it's both popular and both vilified here in the Philippines.
Yeah, they hate it.
Yeah, which is pretty much I think the same everywhere, but especially here, where people really hang on to FMA dearly. And this is one time one of our longtime practitioners, Virgil, he walked into this knife store with a Libre shirt on, and at that time they were doing this knife sharpening class, and the instructor sees his shirt and saying, "Hey, you're a Libre guy." He goes, yeah, and he goes, "Oh, so what did they teach you there? Murder?" And he goes, well, I can't argue with that. It's like, but we like we're done arguing with the.
My general response to that is no, they're not. We're not teaching murder. We're teaching you how to not be murdered.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because murder, see, when people use the word murder specifically, it creates such a false sense of what's happening. Because murder is a proactive,
Premeditated.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or even if it's a crime of passion, it's something you're inflicting on someone else. You know, I'm murdering you. If you attempt to murder me, and I come out on top, and you die as a result, it's not that I committed murder; it's that I survived. So for me, when I'm still in my students, and what hopefully all of our chapters instill in students is, we're not teaching you how to murder. We're teaching you how to survive in a situation where 99% of the population, because most people don't have training, are just going to be completely overwhelmed and just crumble. And, their life will end very quickly, or they'll sustain catastrophic life-altering injuries. So I'm not teaching anyone to be proactive. I actually screen the shit out of my students. Like, I don't have my address or my phone number on the website. I make people email me. And the reason why I make them email me is, I probably shouldn't say this because now people will find ways to circumvent this, but I run their name and their email through Google. I look through social media. I talk with them a bit, and I'll invite them to class to watch a class, and then I'll talk with them a bit after that and get a feel for who they are. And like, I'm sure you guys know, this knife work attracts a lot of fucking weirdos. And whenever we start a new chapter, I tell the chapter, you're going to have weirdos coming out of the woodwork. Screen everyone. If you get a bad vibe about someone, don't let them in. If you let them in and there's just something off about them that you didn't see at first, but you're starting to see, get rid of them. Filter out anyone who doesn't have business, doesn't have the mindset for this. Because there are people who really fetishize knives and knife work. Like, one of my big tells is when someone comes into my class for the first time, and they're like, "Yeah, this is what I carry on me every day," and they just start unloading knives and guns and gear and shit like that. Like, that to me is like, well, as you can see, class is really full. I'll put you on the waiting list. As soon as we get an opening, we'll get a call. Never do. Because like, a normal, rational person isn't going to walk into a room and start unloading all their weapons on the table with a bunch of people they've never met before. It's just not how a normal thinking human being is going to act. And that's not someone that I want to be part of what we do. And I don't want to risk empowering them and sort of putting them in a place mentally where they're looking for an excuse to go out and utilize these skills. Like, one of the things I hate, and ironically, a lot of people who talk shit about Libre being too violent have this mentality where they're like, yeah, I'm not afraid to push steel. Yeah, someone fucks with me, I'll put a knife in him, no problem. I'll take, I won't think twice about it. Or, yeah, I'll cap a motherfucker, I don't care. Someone comes after me and mine, I'll end them quick. And then they turn around and start talking about how we're too violent. I'm not out there saying that to anyone. I mean, just 30 minutes ago, I was saying, I would rather run from a knife fight than engage in it. And the people who criticize being too violent are the ones who really start to develop these fantasies about a violent altercation playing out where they're going to get to stab someone, beat someone into a coma. I'm very much a pacifist. And that I sit around hoping I get in a fight. I don't look for violence. I don't want to engage in a violent altercation on any level. On a fist fight, shoving someone, it's just not something that I want to participate in if I can at all avoid it. But the reason I'm able to have that mindset is because I have the confidence to know that if an extremely violent situation does jump off, if someone comes at me with a knife, comes at me with tire iron or a baseball bat or a crowbar or a machete or whatever that is, I know that I have the skills that I will probably come out on top in that situation. And that allows me to have the mindset of being a pacifist. I mean, like, no, I don't have anything to prove. I don't want to hurt anyone. I feel comfortable having that mindset because I know that if it comes down to it, I can. And so, you know, it's a very weird dynamic where it seems like the people who sort of fantasize about violence the most and sort of talk about, you know, post-apocalyptic scenarios and you know, start to really, you know, think about, you know, the world are always like the world's about to end and, you know, it's all going to become tribal and shit like that. They're usually the ones who talk the most shit about us, where it's like, yes, what we train is has a very violent component to it, but we're not advocating that level of thinking. We're not advocating going on doing this to anyone. If anything, I would rather produce people who do sort of have this pacifist mindset where, I believe it was one of the Jurassic Park novels. I'm not entirely sure about this, but there was a line that I read once that said, the difference between a martial artist and handing someone a gun is a martial artist trained his whole life to be able to take a human life. Whereas if you just hand someone off the street a gun, they don't have that level of respect because they didn't have to earn the power to take a human life. And, you know, you could examine that argument and you could probably tear it apart on the surface, especially people who are big time gun enthusiasts could. And I have nothing against firearms. I very much, you know, in the U.S., we have a Second Amendment, and people, I believe people should have the right to have firearms. You know, I am not an anti-gun guy on that level. But the point I'm trying to make is that if I've done my job as an instructor, if I've given them the skill to take a human life, but I've also contextualized that and illustrated how horrible that act is going to be, and really made them understand this isn't something you should ever want to do under any circumstance. And if you do, it's going to be life altering for you. You're going to be mentally scarred from this, not to mention, you know, the civil and possible criminal ramifications of this. If I've done my job right, you at the same time will be very dangerous with a blade and will never, ever, ever want to have to hurt someone with it. And I think that's what a lot of our detractors miss.
Yeah, it's funny that you again that you have that mindset wherein you're actually a pacifist. You mentioned that, and it's very similar to how Lee Morrison of Urban Combatives pretty much ended what he was telling us. You know, he was talking the whole time about violence and all of that, and in the end, he was saying, "I actually hate violence," and it's the same with you. And you've explained it quite eloquently. In that, you know that martial artist and gun wielding thug analogy, it was very clear, and I think the thing that people miss, you know, people that talk shit about you, is really the context. They miss the context, and with what you've given us today, you know, the people that have been following you will love you even more, and you know, I'm pretty sure who hate you are gonna hate you even more, you know, because because people hate the truth and they don't want to accept it.
Tell you why I'm fine with that, because I'll be honest, like when I first put out my first few videos, I could get 20 people commenting and sending me emails saying, "Dude, you're great, I love this," and I could get one guy being like, and this was years ago, one guy be like, "Oh, dude, you suck." On me, like it would be with me for way longer than it should have been, and I'd start to, do I suck? Is he right? And meanwhile, I got 20 other people telling me I'm great, and I'm still thinking about this one fucking asshole detractor. And, you know, it would stick with me. And then what really changed it for me was I was watching some old footage of Bruce Lee. I believe it was his demonstration at the tournament, the footage that we've all seen. And I'm going down in the threads, and 3/4 of the comments are people just bashing Bruce Lee. And I was like, you know what? If Bruce fucking Lee can't get universal love from the martial arts community, who the fuck am I to expect? And after that, it just never bothered me anymore. Talk all the shit you want. I don't need universal love. I'm not dependent on having, you know, the entire world adore me. I'm confident in what I do because we've trained people who are out there who implemented it in the field and proved it worked. I don't need to prove it to an individual because I know it works. I'm confident that what I teach someone, if they're in a situation, if I've trained them well and they've put in the work on their own, and become proficient, if they're in a life and death struggle, they're going to fare very well in that situation. And that's enough for me.
Yeah.
That's all the praise I need, is that I know personally that if someone gives me that level of trust, they say, I trust what you're teaching me is going to work.
Yeah.
I know that if I do my job and they do theirs, chances are they're going to be okay. And nothing's 100%, but I know that what we do has been proven in the field. So I don't care if someone's like, oh, that one, that's bullshit, whatever. I'm not working theory. I always end up saying we were in the fortunate position to do this, and I hate using the word fortunate because it's such a dark, it's such a twisted position that we were in, where it was like I was in San Diego, and for those of who aren't familiar with where San Diego is geographically, San Diego is right on the other side of the Mexican border. I grew up 20 minutes from Mexico. I could walk 5 minutes from my house, go up on a hill, and see Mexico right now. And so San Diego is, obviously in a first world country, where people are comfortable traveling, comfortable being out, coming here to train. And so we had people coming from all over the world to train in Libre and sort of give us their ideas and sort of add their influence to it. And then we had this laboratory just across the border where we could teach people and they could go out in the field and actually utilize against very dangerous people, against hardened criminals, cartel members, the hardest criminals on the planet, some might say, and then bring that back to us and be like, this didn't work exactly how we expected, or this worked much better than we expected, and we could refine the curriculum based on that. And because we had that experience, I know that what we do is effective because it's been there recently, not 100 years ago, not 50 years ago, not 200 years ago, but it's been there in real time. And we got real time in what we do. And so that's why, if people want to be detractors, that's fine. If you want to talk shit, that's fine. I don't care. And I probably shouldn't admit this, but on a lot of levels, I enjoy it. There's one guy who loves to talk shit about Libre. And I never give him the time of day. And I'm going to say this. And
he even dresses like you, by the way.
What?
He even dresses like you, by the way.
No, this is a guy that you guys have interacted with.
Okay.
I'm not going to say who it is, but I will say this by way of description, and you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. One of the reasons that I've never engaged with this guy is I'm not 100% sure he's not some kind of brilliant performance artist doing a character in some sort of Andy Kaufman, Sacha Baron Cohen type performance art, because the dude is just so over the top narcissistic personality disorder. And he loves to talk shit about Libre. And I probably should admit this, but I am a huge fan of his. Every time he posts a video, I'm there watching. And if he mentions Libre, I'm like, yeah. And he talks all this shit, and I send it to my friends. I'm like, dude, check this dude out. Check him out. And we love it. This dude is a superstar to us because he's so over the top and so entertaining. And he talks shit about Libre all the time, and I don't care. I love it. It's like, in some ways I actually enjoy it when people talk shit. But the other thing is, you guys know this, and I told all my chapters this, when people are talking shit, don't engage them. Because that's what they want. They want you to engage them. They want you to raise them. They want you to raise them up to your level and make it a conversation between peers and elevate their status and give them attention. That's exactly what they're looking for when they're talking shit online.
Yeah.
And the way you negate that is you just let it go. You just ignore it. And then what they do is they move on and they start talking about someone else who will engage them.
Right. A few years ago, I posted a video of a blender exercise. Two of our guys were doing the blender, and I posted it, and so many people liked it. And then there's this one guy in particular, he started talking smack about it, and and me being the way I am, I actually engaged him, and I was just being like really sarcastic and everything, and it went on for a while. And then Sixto would message me, and then this guy would message me, say, hey, stop it, stop it, stop it. You're saying stop. No, I'm having too much fun. And then you send me a message. I don't know if you remember this, but you sent me a message, and he goes, dude, stop it already. And then I go, okay, if Scott, who doesn't have a phone, is actually bothered by this exchange, then I better stop. So I did. But yeah. Anyway, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
well,
Go ahead.
a lot of times the very vocal detractors are people who are instructors who have, for whatever reason, haven't reached the level they want to reach in their career. And they've decided that the way they're going to get attention is to attack people who are more prominent than they are. And when this more prominent person starts engaging them, it starts to give them more credibility. The audience, the more prominent person's audience starts crossing over, starts to give them likes. And meanwhile, you're wasting your time and energy. Right. And this is another reason why I really say don't engage these people. We only have so much time on this planet. We only have so many hours in a day. There are a million other more constructive ways to use your time than arguing with some dipshit online.
Dax, listen, okay? Dax, listen.
I'm one of those dipshits, actually.
But it's like, because you can get sucked into this where it's like, you're debating this guy and it's like every free second you're going back and like addressing this and getting into these arguments, and no one's ever changed anyone's mind in an online thread debating something. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, you're just wasting your time and energy, and it also, you don't look good. You look insecure when you're engaging people who are saying stupid shit.
Right.
And then people also know that they can get a rise out of you, so that just tempts other people to engage in this shit. And pretty soon, all you're doing is just dealing with people who just are just sucking up your energy and your attention. And it's like, me personally, I would rather use that time to go do the things I enjoy, or to go train, or to learn a new skill, or read a book. Anything other than just fucking bitching with some dipshit in his mother's basement. It's just, there's no upside to it. So why do it? Why engage in that? But that being said, there are some people who talk shit, and when I see them talking shit, dude, I'm right there, not to debate them. I never comment on it. I just go there and I laugh and I enjoy the shit out. I might show it to some people and we laugh about it, and then that's it. But that's as far as I'll ever go with it. That's all you need to do.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's wrap this up. Thank you so much, Scott, for enlightening us and putting more fire into your haters. Any last words before we let you go?
Nah, just we have that online event coming up with you guys.
Yeah.
Just remember to plug that. We're good.
Yeah. We'll do enough of that for you.
Cool.
So, 6-2.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I learned a lot from this discussion. Thanks. Let's do this again.
Always.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, and thank you everyone for watching. Well, as usual, we hope you learned something. If you didn't, then too bad. So, till next time. Peace.